So we're it's not the one attached to the invite, it's another one.
Yeah, it's, let me paste it again in the chat because I think if you just joined, it wouldn't be there.
They should introduce a feature where you can pin links to a Zoom room and just open them up when you're in the room.
We don't have any topics yet, but selfishly, because Stephen is here, I want to add my spec PR. We have feedback on that. We also have Yael and Dan, so. I could share my screen if you want to all look at it. Do that. Do this one. In particular, this concern about the changes to metadata.toml.
Got it. So the build pack was to differentiate between a user provided default in metadata toml. Is there such thing as a user provided build time default process type? Like, can the user specify a process type that overrides the images? It seems like it'd be a useful feature. I just don't know if that's a thing.
It exists. It's not in this file, but it exists as a concept in the system.
How does that? Is that
it's
something
a flag to exporter or an environment variable?
Got it. Okay, I see. I think it was less the build pack prefix and more like this file has a bunch of tables in it, and then just having that one key there at the top. So, I don't know. I'm not going to block on this. I just wanted to make sure that we're comfortable with it.
We try to make things simpler. I mean, it's just having, as Nali wrote in the second paragraph, like having default equals true or false for each build pack. It can be very confusing for the user just to see this.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it wouldn't make sense to normalize the defaults on the processes themselves or something, so that only one of them has a default Boolean, because then it looks like just a weirdly different version of the original list we created. Yeah. I can't think of anything better. Should we create a table like defaults maybe or something? Would that be does anybody like that? Like we could have a table called defaults and then
I don't know if you can tell me what else would go in there.
Can we change this file later? Is that easy to do?
Yeah, I want to kill this file later.
Okay, then whatever. I'll
I think everything the builder does to create this file could be done by the exporter, because all of the data it needs to do that is already in the layers directory.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, I am going to approve it.
Can the exporter easily determine what order the build packs were executed in? Okay.
It can, because it gets the group.
Yes, yes.
Great. When I asked earlier about is there a way to provide a default what I meant to ask was, is there a way to provide an override start command at build time? Not as there, I realize these are different concepts now. I know there's a way to provide an environment variable that overrides the process type as a user. Is there a way to override the default start command during the build process without taking a Docker file and then remembering to put the launcher in an entry point?
There really should be. I think we should have that. Like right now, that role is filled by everyone's proc file Buildpacks. But there's some features of our process type, like direct, true, false, that don't map to the typical proc file usage. And I think it makes sense to just have a feature that lets people set process types using all the same fields Buildpacks can use. Even if they're not default, just add process types as well.
Definitely agree. Approved.
Awesome. Thank you. And I see that we have another agenda item.
This is mine. This is like kind of unimportant detail, but since there wasn't a lot on the agenda, I thought I'd just ask here instead of in Slack. We have some policy enforcement on the spec repo that prevents us from merging things when the history isn't linear, like the branch isn't up to date, even if there's no merge conflicts. And I find it a little bit annoying because you tell people to rebase stuff, but then if we merge another one first, then you have to do it again. And I don't think it's important, really, especially if these things are touching unrelated parts of the spec that our history is linear. Does anyone have any objection to me removing that requirement?
I have an objection to requirements of linear history in general, because I think they don't make sense for lots of people contributing to, lots of people who may not be comfortable with others rewriting their history contributing to the same repository. So in very strong favor of getting rid of that requirement in any place we have it.
Do it right now.
But I do have very specific opinions about this that not everybody agrees with.
We've already accommodated one of those opinions, which is we don't use the like rebase button that would make it linear. But I think that creates another problem if we say it must be linear, because then we're asking people to rebase stuff. But when there's enough parallel pieces of work in flight, this is very annoying.
Cool.
Should we move on to the next one? Append args.
Yeah, that was something that, like, I think it may be a very specific use case, but let's say I have some command, something like Python -m some module with some default arguments that I want it to have, and then I want whatever arguments that the user provides to, let's say, Docker run or in their container spec to be appended to that. Can now, like, this could be achieved by creating like a binary that has this, like, these default set of arguments and etc., and then takes the ones from the user and appends them to the default command using a custom build pack. But would it be possible to have the lifecycle manage something like this? So like if the arguments that are provided are whether they're overridden or whether they're appended to the default that's provided by a build pack. Does that make sense?
Totally. What's the behavior? I forget. If you create a Docker file and you have a entry point and you have, like, say, it's just bin something, right? Name of the single binary location in a list, and then you have a commands like CMD or args equivalent, right? That's also a list of things. When you do a Docker run, if you put stuff at the end, I don't think it appends to that list and command, it overrides it. Is that right?
Replaces it.
But it runs it with the entry point.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people who definitely want to append, so I wouldn't want to change our default.
What's our default is like a Docker file, right?
Our default is append.
I thought it was override.
It depends what API version a specific build pack is using. Right now, if you're using one of the known process types and you put some extra arguments in there, it should append.
I liked the RFC where we talked about this for probably way too long, I think, if I remember correctly, where I think Emily actually listed out, I think like 8 different use cases. And I think that's where we decided to do the command symlink thing, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I think it's called a multi-call launcher RFC. Yeah, here we go.
Arguments.md, is that the right one?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
It's the one I pasted in text if you want to click that link, Emily.
Yeah. There's another part of this RFC that's about how we interpolate values and shell arguments that I think has ended up being less useful than I thought it would be. But the appending behavior is desirable, I think. I put the link in the doc. I'll make it look prettier. 1 second.
Would it make sense to add a flag to each process type that controls whether or not the things you put on, that you provide to Docker run, or the things you provide to the launcher as arguments, right, for the process type get appended versus overridden? It seems like it'd be easy to do, but it also seems like we're moving towards the model that Sam is asking for.
Yeah, I think we could have, we went through this. I don't think we can do other command line values to configure this, but we can certainly have environment variables that change the way the launcher behaves if we want to support more different strategies.
So can we just like add a new argument to like the launch toml where for a particular process type you can specify whether it would append or whether it would override?
Or you're talking about like a build pack provided process?
Yeah.
Right now, a build pack cannot modify a process type that was contributed by another build pack. If you like redefine it, you've basically just replaced the whole thing. It's on the user side that you can append arguments at runtime.
That's essentially what I want. Like, so, what I was noticing a different behavior. So, essentially, when I was trying to append arguments, it was replacing or overwriting them. I don't know why.
I'm sorry, I missed that part of the original problem statement. You're right that is what build packs do. Users can append arguments, but build packs can't.
I think Sam's saying the behavior he wants is, as a build pack, you can define a command and some arguments, right? Yeah. And then as a user, if you provide additional arguments after Docker run, instead of replacing the argument list that the build pack specified for the process type, it appends to that list. And I think that's the current behavior we have now, but a suggestion that I think I made a little bit earlier and Sam also made is, might it make sense to add a flag into that process list, right? It's in launch toml that the build pack writes, right? That controls whether or not when the user provides arguments, those override the arguments the build pack provided versus append to the arguments that the build pack provided. Does that make sense?
Ooh, I'd rather have the user switch between those two behaviors because I think you want users to be able to predict how it's going to behave. And if they're used to, if I create an image with one set of build packs and I add arguments, it appends, then all of a sudden it's magically replacing in a different one. I think that'd be confusing to users who are trying to figure out exactly which arguments they need to provide.
I mean, as a build, sorry, go ahead.
So for me, it was more like, as a build pack author, I want to control what they can do, and that's the API that I'm providing. Like, I would set these processes for you, and then any additional arguments you provide will either override this particular argument or they would be appended to it. So let's say for whatever security reason I want to just execute some specific set of commands with a particular set of arguments that I don't want overridden whatever, whenever. So I only expose those, and any other arguments that the user provides would simply be appended. And currently, like, I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but I seem to find it's overriding the whole thing, or it's interpreting the whole thing as a single command, which it doesn't find. I may be doing something wrong with my process, but so essentially the way I got around it was like create a shim which has these things, and then it has like a $@ which accepts the arguments and then appends it to the end. Maybe I'm doing something wrong there, but essentially, as a build pack author, I want to control which of these two behaviors I'm providing, and then document that in my API for the users to just do whatever they want with it. This may not make sense for something like profile build pack, but like for specific build packs that provide like certain processes, that's the use case I'm imagining.
That use of like a shim to wrap a command and some args so that the user can append additional things to it, I've seen a bunch of times. And also, like, to me, that's helpful in justifying, like, maybe it should be easier for a build pack to control that behavior if people are working around it right now.
One way I can see doing this is right now. Here, let me just open the RFC because I'm looking at it, the one where or do we already? Sorry, I have to share a screen and it told me not to. 1 second. Let me try this again. Okay. We're looking at the RFC. Everyone see that? One thing in our process definition right now, so we have a process type, we have a command, and we have args. And what happens on the image when you create the process is the process type gets turned into like a symlink to the launcher, and that's set at the entry point. And then args are set in the image. Well, they're not set in the image command, but they're set in this file, and then you can replace them and use them. But I wonder if we had command as an array of strings, so it's more like entry point, if we could construct an entry point that was the symlink to the type and some extra arguments to it or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, so it could be more similar to how you can use entry point and command to make certain replaceable things and other non-replaceable things. Is that kind of what you're imagining?
That completely makes sense. Yeah. So if your command instead of a string is an array, those are like the default things that would always be there, and then anything in args would be overwritten.
This would kind of push back into the Docker model with entry point and command, as opposed to the K8s model where, I think command, even though it does map to entry point to some extent, is more like, the go command, right?
Yeah. I think either way, the concepts are the same in Docker and in K8s. Like they're both arrays of strings that behave the same, but they just use different names for the two concepts. I don't have strong feelings about the names, but I wonder if instead of having a single string and an array of strings, if we had two arrays, we could just more closely model how other OCI images work.
Yeah.
And after this, you should show me the case where you see it clobbering, because I feel like it shouldn't do that.
Yeah. So essentially, like I can give you a rough thing what's happening. So let's say you have a let's say you're using the official Paquito proc file Buildpack, and um, even there, like I think the only way, okay, so even there, I don't think it allows you to have this to specify this kind of a behavior. First of all, so the only way you could achieve something like this is define like a process and have environment variables instead of arguments there. Because if you add something else there, it sort of behaves weirdly. Um, I've um, tried the same thing with a different build pack, but I'll see if I can produce a minimal reproduction that can help to explain what I'm seeing.
The way the proc file works is a little bit weird because it is setting everything that's in your proc file. It's not like breaking it into commands and args. It's setting everything in the command string. And the launcher has special behavior that if all it has is command, it runs it as a bash script, which lets you use certain bash syntax that you couldn't use if you were tokenizing things.
That may be what I was thinking.
All the weird details of that are in the RFC that I linked in the doc. I think that's probably what we're running into. I have for a while wanted to change that behavior, so instead of switching on the like existence or absence of args, we can more explicitly in the process type, like maybe have a bool that's like shell or script or something. So you could explicitly toggle between saying like, my command is a bash script that I want to run, and args are args to bash, not args to my command, versus I have a command in args.
On the overriding behavior, if we switch entry point to have multiple arguments, I think the behavior should be override by default when you pass things in through Docker run on args, because that's the switch that the. Does that seem right?
Yeah.
So I feel like we're talking about a lot of things that will be breaking changes, and since we've talked about some other like the bash interpolation of each of the arguments through eval is weird, right?
That was crucially important to us until execd came along.
Yeah,
and now it's not important at all.
Maybe and it's like a very weird thing to do, right? Interpolate each of those arguments separately in that context. Maybe it's time for another refactor.
We've learned.
Command.
We have some better ideas now.
Yeah, that'd be great. It definitely, especially with the eval thing, feels weird to me right now.
Yeah, I think this RC was an improvement from when you couldn't depend and we didn't use concepts like entry point at all, but we have not yet modeled it all the way correctly.
Should we move on to the last topic on the agenda?
Sure. I can present. Can you see this? I just wanted to, I haven't seen a lot of traction kind of on this RC, and I know for our own stuff at Salesforce, we kind of want to get something through, if we're going to change it or not at all, just because we want to kind of get going and implement some stuff. And so I think bike shed kind of RFCs can take forever just because there's not a big kind of push one way or another. And I'd like to just kind of get to a consensus and move on. So Yeah, so basically here, just trying to solve the fact that anything at the top level needs to kind of be at a reverse domain thing, or we have to special case it because it can conflict with basically TLDs that potentially can be registered. So kind of just looking to get votes and ideas on what people actually want.
I added a proposal for the TLD problem that I just linked in the chat or to the comment.
I would approve this as is. I think the underscore solves the problem, and you know, it seems good to me. Is your proposal something different than or do you want to talk about your proposal a little bit?
Mine was just special casing project.
Yeah, I think I listed under one of the alternatives. I tried to capture everything that came through the RFC discussions. Like Manuel also listed one where we could just put everything under namespace, similar to I guess the metadata thing, but even the Buildpack IO stuff would go under there. And you could of course replace underscore with literally any other table name variation that doesn't conflict. So I kind of listed that as well. But I think those are kind of the 3 options that we have.
I think something like saying all names that start with underscore are meta defined, right? Or like, you know, not configuration for things that you're using the file to describe, but configuration for the file itself or something like that. I don't know how you want to describe it, but then we could say like, instead of just underscore at the top, because that's kind of weird, maybe underscore project could be instead of project, and then we don't have to deal with the clobbering dot project. Or do folks not like the underscores?
I think I like plain underscore better than underscore something. That just looks like a hack to me.
Interesting. To me, it's more like I feel like there are other examples of this where like there's some character at something means, you know, like something different than if you didn't have the symbol before it. I don't know.
I think it makes sense if you have more than one thing, or you I guess define it that way, right? Where you're just like anything with underscore is a meta defining something for the table.
I don't want to.
I mean, we could do. Yeah, part of what I think looks ugly to me is like when you start doing like underscore project dot licenses or just even underscore dot licenses. But if we were to do that, I'm not sure we would need to nest things under whatever our top level thing is, because we're opening up the rest of the file to whatever else. So when you say it's only one thing, it could be not more than one thing, and we could change things like licenses. And I think there's others too that we nest under project, tables that we nest under project that don't necessarily need to be under there. But in any case, I'm not like vehemently opposed to the underscore in either case. So.
In that suggestion you had, Joe, would you break these out outside of underscore and just have underscore API, underscore ID, underscore name?
I can't see what those are. My screen's too small.
Just the normal project descriptor, project stuff we have.
The keys?
Bare keys. Because you're talking about underscore licenses being something you potentially would want to break out. Does that apply to anything under project?
No, I'm just saying any tables or array of tables. So
because it's an array.
Yeah, or because it's a table, right?
Yeah,
like
table.
The keys can stay just under underscore whatever.
You sound very quiet, Terrence.
Oh.
Is that just me? Or is other people having trouble hearing?
I found it pleasant.
Might just be far from the mic.
That's better.
It's better. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Do you have opinions, Emily, now that you're speaking on this topic?
My opinion might be a little bit unpopular. I feel like we're solving a problem I feel like the problem we're solving is how could you configure every tool under the sun in a single TOML file, right?
Yeah.
Which is, in my mind, a little bit beyond the scope of Buildpacks. Like, to make this succeed and be something lots of people adopted, like it's almost like a separate project that we want to do separate evangelism around and have as a standard. I'm not convinced that I think this is going to end up being widely adopted. And I don't see having a couple different project files as a huge TOML files as a huge problem. Like, it's a little bit ugly, but I'm not sure it's uglier than the usage we're going to come up with to put literally anything under the sun into one TOML file. But I also don't have enough of a problem with it to want to say, like, I think strongly that we shouldn't do it. Like, I think it'll be fine and people will get used to it. And if other people see this as an important problem to solve, like, maybe I'm just missing it. And if this is the problem we want to solve, I don't have a better solution for it than this, and we should probably go ahead with this.
It's like I think I see it as like an app image descriptor, or like a file that lets you say, this is my image or this is my source code that I want to build into an image, and here's how I build it. But it could be built with a whole bunch of different tools, right? And those tools need namespacing within that file, and we want to let people come up with their own configuration for those tools or something. And so in that sense, like, it's not a file for configuring everything in the world, sort of. It's just like a file that has, some high level metadata about an application, and then configuration for the tools you might use to build it. Is the best way I can frame it to make the kind of, to make it make sense in my head, I guess.
And I get that. I think I was using PyProject.toml as an example. That's kind of similar to this, but in the Python world. And they have like an arbitrary tools table where different tools can have schemas under the table in different namespaces. I think that's sort of solving a similar goal. But in that case, everything is sort of a second-class citizen to the project. And this is more about making things a first-class citizen, right? Yeah, I'm not trying to say we should do something different. Like, I'm okay with this. I will approve it if everyone thinks it's a good idea.
I guess for me, what are next steps of how do I need to change this? How do I move stuff forward? Which I guess is always the tricky part of RFCs.
I think I would approve anything where we're not clobbering the top level TLD namespace, so probably something with underscores at the top level. I don't have an opinion about underscore versus underscore project, or it's not a strong opinion there. Probably lean towards underscore project, but I would approve either way.
How do you feel about Joe's suggestion of the breaking out stuff where you have multiple underscore things?
I don't like mixing I don't like mixing the reverse domain notation with, the proposal with the, not like config.com example, but you mean like
underscore licenses?
That would be fine for me too. I think I'd be okay with that. To me, as long as the domains are top level and the metadata-y stuff is stuff that's not valid domains.
Okay. I guess, Joe, what do you want to see based on Steven's comment?
I think he dropped.
Oh, did Joe drop? I'll follow up with Joe offline. I don't know if other folks on the call have strong opinions or an opinion one way or another. Take
Seems like there aren't a lot more opinions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the next topic? We have now 3 more topics. Build pack layer modifications by other build packs.
Yeah, that was also something that I noticed, and I'm not sure what people think is the ideal scenario. But essentially, if you said on a layer, if you set build equals true, you can essentially have subsequent build packs modify that layer. Is that like a good thing? Like, is that something that the build pack abstraction should not break? Like, it should not touch other build packs, or like has this use case come up for whatever reason? Like, the reason I'm asking is, let's say one build pack configures a set of files, executables, whatever, and it just provides those things to the next build steps, and they then make some modifications which may be reflected in the original set of layers. And if you're using something like caching with some sort of metadata, they can essentially modify like what was put in the first place, or make changes which are not reflected by the original metadata that you're using to invalidate the cache or whatever. So that's sort of weird to me, but I don't think we explicitly prevent something like that. Or do we even want to prevent something like that?
It's a spec violation for a build pack to modify another build pack's layers, but it's not enforced.
Yeah, we tell people not to do it. We could build in some enforcement though.
Because
It'd be a little tricky, but sorry.
Yeah, the reason is that's kind of convenient for me right now, but if that's supposed to change, then I'll have to think, because there are certain ecosystems where like they look for files in certain places, and let's say one build pack is providing a set of files or layers, and then the subsequent build pack, like if you follow like some Paquito ideology where you have really small build packs that do just one thing, and then the subsequent build packs are responsible for like small configuration changes or modifications. Sometimes they have to make modifications to the original build packs layers to modify the whole thing as but yeah, that was my question. And even within build packs, is it fine? Like, oh no, yeah, that's fine. But yeah, my that was my main question, like whether one build pack should encroach the namespace of another.
It's definitely a spec violation for a build pack to modify another build pack's layers, but build packs can kind of collaborate on, a shared directory together in the app directory. That's safe. And it's also, build pack could also copy another Buildpacks layers into its layers and then use that to override, things on path or LD library path if they needed to. A build pack doesn't generally have access, like it doesn't know the path technically of the layers, before it, unless that build pack before it set an environment variable that points to one of those layer paths. But even in that case, it's still a violation to modify something by following it back.
Yeah. So like an example use case would be, let's say you have a Python build pack and you're using, let's say, like you're setting a environment variable to provide a cache directory. And then the subsequent pip installation build packs are installed, like caching their like wheels or whatever in that cache directory. So you're essentially writing to some other build packs directory, but maybe like that directory, that cache directory is supposed to be used by multiple subsequent build packs. So I don't know if that should be put in like some application, like the application path, or should there be some shared layer where they can put these things? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wonder if you can, like where is the cache directory in the previous layer just for build, or is it something that ends up in the full image?
Just for building. Because if I put in the application directory, then I have to figure out like a way to clean that up. Then I need another build pack at the very end that cleans this whole thing up. And I don't see any other place where I could put this.
Trying to think of the different patterns that we use in the Java build pack. I don't know if you have any like need that's quite like this. I can't think of a direct example. There definitely are places where the Java build pack is collaborating on something that needs to change throughout the build process. I'm thinking about sort of like the application itself in the native image case. Like we might have a Maven build pack that replaces the source code with a jar in the apter. And then we might have a native image build pack that replaces the jar with a native image in the apter. What we're doing in each of those cases is actually, there's like a build cache layer that or just a cache layer. I don't even think it's a build layer because it's not exposed to other build packs, where the app sort of stores its piece of the puzzle. And then as part of the build process, it copies it into the place where it needs to be. So you can imagine what happens on a rebuild is like the Maven build pack, checks a hash of something, and then it either builds a new jar and caches it, or it takes its jar from its cache and puts it in the apter. And then in the native image build pack, it takes the digest of the jar and it's like, oh, do I need to compile a new native image, or can I copy the one I have stored? So in that case, like everyone is collaborating on something that's happening in the apter, but each build pack is caching its piece with the metadata it would need to know whether it should be invalidating that piece or not. I feel like where this breaks down in like the exact translation to your use case is that works really well in the apter for something that's supposed to be in the final image, but like how could they collaborate on something that isn't supposed to go in the apter? Like there are ways you could do it with like a tempter or something, where every build pack is caching its piece, and then depending on.
But that doesn't, how would I preserve that across builds?
There would be some copying things around, right? Like you could store your piece in a build layer and copy it to a tempter, the kind of thing that won't get saved, and set an environment variable. And then the next build pack could go add something to it. And it could also create a cache layer where it's saving the piece it adds. So maybe it doesn't need to regenerate that. I can just copy it in. But it's a little bit convoluted. But I think that's what that pattern would look like if you were doing it in a build only non-launch case.
Could you just have all the build packs or like first build pack that needs to create this tempter thing, make temp, and then set an environment variable for that, and then all of them just write to it after that because it's going to go away anyways. Is there a reason to copy it back into the cache layers?
It's about whether you want to cache these things, right? So if
Well,
you
like on the
don't need to cache them to speed up the next build, then it's simple. Everyone can just copy things into the tempter every single time.
Yeah.
It's about whether you want to save yourself some time by restoring them later. So you need
Right.
to have a cache layer where your build pack is saving off just the piece it's responsible for, so you can restore it later.
Right. You can add a new construct, shared layers.
That's like, I don't know if there are other use cases, but like I saw that this was sort of clunky, and I was guessing that I was violating some sort of spec here when I was modifying layers from other build packs. But yeah, that's what's happening, right?
I mean, for layers that are build equals true and cache equals true, it's maybe technically safe to do that. Could we? Would it be
It's
acceptable
about
to say that?
layer avoidance, right? Like a layer can't trust that the layer metadata is telling it what's in the layer if later build packs can change it.
Yeah.
But does that matter for
It so if you're doing,
if it's not launched true? Sorry, go ahead.
so if you're doing incremental builds, your cache would effectively change the final output somehow. So I mean, you also have to do cache invalidation at the right place to produce correct artifacts at the end of the day. And if you have some complex logic like this, where some other build packs are modifying your directories and you don't know when to invalidate your cache, you might end up with an application that's not built correctly.
If the build pack that creates or that owns the cache true build true layer is knows that other build packs are going to write to that layer, though, there's not a problem with like the life cycle restoring that layer or not, or kind of like caching and export level things. So but I mean, that's right, like it would be weird. It would be, in that case, it would be better if like the first build pack also exposed the metadata so other build packs could update it if they updated the thing, right, or something like that.
It's also like, what if the first build pack that creates this thing does something slow to populate it? And it would like to know whether it should do that on the next run. But let's say a subsequent build pack went in, deleted some things out of it.
Yeah.
Like, how does it know whether it should run or not?
Other build pack changed the metadata.
This is a little bit off the wall, maybe. Could be a bad idea, just throwing it out there. I've always kind of wanted something that's a little bit like an anti-slice, where you could have a slice that's basically something you don't want to include in your final image. Like you can carve out a section of the apter and say, don't export this. Then I wonder if you could still use the apter as a collaboration place. But that is very similar to my tempter idea. It doesn't solve your copying problem.
The cache, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we've tried to at least have this time around have more explicit contracts about build pack interaction. And this definitely feels like it goes towards, I mean, very dependent on the use case, like very much hidden contracts. Not saying we should do it, but probably something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Because does that like other build pack now have a hard dependency on this very specific build pack then? Expecting that layer to be there? Like, is this build pack not functional without it?
It's not a hard dependency, it just slows it down. So you could technically make it a hard dependency, like by just requiring the provision by that cache build pack. So let's say that cache build pack provides a pip cache. And then in the subsequent build packs that require it, you can just say require pip cache. So you know at least something is providing it.
Because the contract isn't like a one build pack later expects a special absolute path that involves the earlier build pack ID, and it'd be through an environment variable that any build pack maybe could set to its cache directory. I could see a contract like this not creating a hard dependency between different build packs, right?
Do you use snapshotting somehow to enable this collaboration?
You could do something. I was thinking about that, like in one build pack, basically overlay on another, and we can distinguish them. I feel like that starts to get into performance problems.
Yeah.
Like they're start making builds slow. I'm also wondering, and this probably isn't possible because it depends on the tooling, but can you get the tooling to cache to one place but treat another cache as like a read cache? Because that'd be ideal if you could like run one of these tools and tell them to write from one place but read from another. You could just have the diff, right?
I mean, but I do want them to read and write to the same place, because if the subsequent things want the same dependency, I want them to reuse it.
Yeah, it's like if you could create a path of caches or something, right? Then it would kind of just work for everybody. But that's probably not possible in every tool.
No.
I'm gonna have to think about this one some more.
It's fine. I quickly had like one other thing, which is like modifications to the home directory. Now this is, I think currently modifications to the home directory are not exported, like because I guess you would require snapshotting to take the diffs from any base, build or run image, and then see the modifications made by the build packs. But essentially the use case is currently, if you wanna make any modifications to the home directory for like some configuration or whatever, the only way to achieve something like that is persistent across build packs is, I can't think of anything, but like there's no way to make modifications to the home directory which are persisted throughout the build process. Any modifications to the home directory only persist for the duration of the build of one single build pack. So things like a lot of tools don't allow changing their behavior, and they depend on like hard-coded paths to some home directory config files, for example. So
the Paketo side, we use symlinks pretty heavily for this. So we create all the things we want in layers in the layers directory, and then create a symlink from the home directory. So then on a rebuild, like even if you don't need to repopulate your Maven cache or something, you do recreate the symlink every time to set things up.
So my use case was for like lightweight configuration files that you want to configure once and have all the subsequent build packs use. So I mean, it's like about configuring it each and every time you need something like that. So let's say you have some certain proxies or certain registries that you want to configure for all the subsequent build packs of a particular ecosystem. You got to do it for each build pack run in the home. So you could do something like set it in some environment variable or something, and then create that file each time for each build pack. That just seemed cumbersome.
I guess if it's a shared configuration file, Why do you have to create it for each build pack? I see why you have to create it for each build, but I don't see why you have to create it for each build pack.
Because I noticed that the contents of the home directory were being wiped between each build pack run. So like it was getting reset to the default state, which is in the build image for each before the run of each.
I don't think it should be getting wiped between build packs. It should definitely be wiped between builds, but not between build packs in a group.
I don't know why I was observing that.
Yeah, send me some logs or a bug or something. I feel like I would be surprised if it was doing that.
Okay, I'll confirm again. Because I definitely don't need this between builds. I just need it during one build. I just need some things to stay in the home directory throughout.
That's supposed to work. So
Okay.
if it doesn't, we should be fixing something.
I'll confirm again, and if I can find the minimal steps, I'll put an issue. But in general, is home directory snapshotting supposed to work? Like if you make any modifications to that, is it supposed to? No. Okay.
Like you're allowed to modify it, but it's ephemeral and it won't come back on the next build and it won't end up in the final image.
Cool.
All right, guys, I think I'm late for my next meeting. This was fun. Lots of good things to think about. Thanks for all the good questions, everyone.
Thanks. See ya.